You're listening to the Shared Security Podcast, exploring the trust you put in people, apps, and technology, with your host, Tom Eston. In episode 86 for September 16th, 2019, all about end-to-end encryption with Max Krohn from Keybase.io. Are you looking for the very best products to protect your digital privacy? Well, Silent Pocket has everything you need to mine the grid with their patented product line of Faraday bags and wallets. Visit silentpocket.com today and receive 15% off your order with discount code SHAREDSECURITY. Joining me on the podcast to discuss end-to-end encryption is Max Krohn, co-founder of Keybase.io. Welcome to the show, Max.
Thanks so much, Tom. Great to be here.
All right. So tell us a little bit about your background and what is Keybase.io?
Sure thing. So my background is, I guess, mixed between two different areas of computer science. I've been involved with other startups in the past. Keybase.io is the third startup I've co-founded with some of the same founding team. The first two startups we did together were SparkNotes, which is still being used today, as far as I understand, as a Cliff Note style literature summary for kids in high school and college. And that was kind of in the early 2000 era. After we kind of finished with that startup, we moved on to another one called OkCupid, which is a free dating website that's gotten pretty popular in the US and UK, mainly English-speaking countries. And that was a company we ran from about 2003 to 2010 when we sold it to IAC. That's they're kind of the roll-up of all the different big dating properties. So that was our second startup, and one of the co-founders from OkCupid and I, we kind of, after we left IAC, we were looking around for interesting problems to work on, and Keybase was kind of what we happened upon. And I say that because we were working on a bunch of other different projects at the time, and this is something that we first started as pretty much an informal hobby project, but that had a lot of early traction, and we thought that maybe we were onto something that really resonated with people. And to give you a little bit more kind of idea of what Keybase is, because I haven't described it, it's definitely grown a lot from where we first started it. I think if I were to describe what we do right now, I would say it's an end-to-end encrypted version of Slack. So Slack is I don't know if your audience is listening to, if they're users of Slack, but it's more or less a replacement for IRC or other internet chat apps that came before it. And it's a good way for people in a company or a small business to just kind of type little messages back and forth to each other rather than using text or email. It's become pretty popular. I believe Slack just went public this year. What's interesting to us about Slack is that when you use their product, you're basically trusting that they are doing a good job of keeping your data secure. And what that means is if they have any sort of bug that exposes their data to the outside world in a way that's not exactly how they intend, or if they have someone in their company who's a spy, or maybe someone in their company who's malicious, which the bigger a company gets, the more likely such a thing would happen. It could be that everything that people are typing back and forth on Slack is going to become public knowledge. And I think a lot of people who use Slack would be horrified by that scenario. If people are using this product for salary discussions or cap table negotiations, or secret projects that their company is working on, or even something simple like API keys or passwords. Just imagine if something went bad and all that became public knowledge. And this is not a hypothetical. Actually, Slack recently had a disclosure that they had a pretty bad bug in 2015 that was partially remedied at the time, but not fully remedied, and it left potentially many accounts and many conversations open to hackers to just break in and steal the data. And Slack has not disclosed how much was revealed as part of that event, but we know something did happen, and we know it might have been pretty bad. Whatever happened there, we think because of architectural decisions that they have made, it's likely to happen again. And if we think about how to solve the problem at a deep level, we come to end-to-end encryption, which is basically what Keybase is all about right now.
Very cool. So, for our listeners who might not be familiar with end-to-end encryption, just what is it very briefly, and how is it different than other types of encryption?
That's a great question. So regular encryption has been around on the internet since basically the earliest days of Netscape. And what standard encryption looks like is that you sit down at your computer, you see a little green lock in the upper left-hand corner somewhere, and what that means is that your computer has an encrypted connection to your bank or to your mail provider or whatever it is. And what that means is if you're at a Starbucks and someone is listening to all the transmissions going into and out of your computer, they're not going to be able to see anything they can make sense of. It'll be encrypted. So in other words, the communications between your computer and the server is encrypted in such a way that only you and the server can actually read it, and no other passive listeners along the line, or even listeners who can actually inject little messages into your conversation with your bank, they can't actually make sense of the conversation. That's actually a very powerful primitive that allows us to do things like banking online without having to worry that someone's going to break into your bank account. But that's a pretty different type of encryption from end-to-end encryption. So in end-to-end encryption, the setup is a little bit different, and it's mainly used in terms of messaging. So imagine, Tom, you and I were messaging each other. In end-to-end encryption, what I would do is I would get something called a public key for you, which means I would look you up in a directory of some sort. I get this credential that maps to you as a person, and then I'd encrypt everything for your public key. So in other words, I would send a message through a server, and that server, unlike the banking case, would have no access to the plain text of our message. They just see the encryption of the message. And so the server in this case is just someone who's like a dumb switchboard. Like the most it could do is take a message that I sent to you and send it to you, or send it to someone else. If they did send it to someone else, that other person couldn't decrypt it. So it would just look undecipherable to them. But you would have the private key or the cryptographic means to decrypt it. And so what this means is that Keybase as a company, or other businesses in this business, they do not have the capacity to understand what people are messaging about on their platform. All they can do is just dumbly relay messages. And unless the crypto is broken, which everyone thinks it isn't, they have no ability to see what people are talking about, to mine the data, or anything like that we're kind of hearing more and more about from the big players.
Yeah, and it's interesting you bring that up, because I think with the recent news we've been seeing about governments like our very own here in the U.S. asking the large tech companies to build in encryption backdoors into services and products to all under the name of terrorism and preventing mass shootings. What are your thoughts on that, and where do you think that's going to go?
Oh, wow. Well, there's a lot I could say on this. I think the simplest thing I could say, which isn't exactly the most accurate thing, but the simplest thing I could say is that any technology you can dream of has a legitimate purpose and a purpose that's potentially malicious. You could think about, fertilizer. Should we ban use of fertilizer because people can make bombs out of it, right? I mean, and with encryption, it's the same thing. I mean, overwhelming majority of this technology is used to protect people's information, and a small minority might be used maliciously. I mean, it does not seem like the balance is on the side of outlawing it just for that reason, because there's so much legitimate use case for it. I'll go a step further, though. I think I would almost like to compare cryptography to a lock on your front door. And a lock on your front door, you can make the same argument about. I mean, if the terrorists can lock their doors, or if the mass shooters can lock their doors, and that prevents their neighbors from walking into their houses and knowing they're going to like blow something up or shoot something up. But that would be a very bad argument for door locks, right? It seems like people fundamentally know they have a right to protect the things that are theirs and to prevent other people from stealing them. And this is exactly the right analogy for data. And it used to be the case that we didn't care too much about data, but I'd say today people probably care more about their data than they do about the things in their house. And so just as much as they're entitled to lock up their house, they're also entitled to protect their data. And there's very other little ways I can think of to protect your data aside from encrypting it. If you just say, Google, you can have all my data. I trust you guys. You're going to do a great job. Don't let anyone else steal it or access it without my permission. I think Google will say, we'll do our best, but it's basically an impossible job, just because their systems are complicated. There are lots of people who need access to that data for purposes of debugging or whatnot. And in that scenario, you basically can never delete anything, once it leaves your hands, it's basically out in the world. And we see this over and over again. Facebook, Capital One, Target. Look at all these giant companies that are doing their best job to keep their businesses secure and to provide the best product for their consumers. They just get broken into repeatedly at a tremendous cost to the people who are using those products. Now, you as a consumer, you who have rights to privacy and storing your data in a way that only you can access. I mean, this is the only thing you can do to protect your data is to encrypt it. And if government agencies are going to try to weaken it, I think that's basically robbing you as an honest person of the only tool you could possibly use to protect your data and your privacy.
Yeah, it's very much the same argument that in the privacy side of things, right? With, people will say, well, privacy's dead. I don't really care about my privacy because everybody has my information anyway. It's very similar, in the crypto space is like, it's really a fundamental human right, your privacy and encryption too.
I would totally agree. And I would really want to take an argument up with the person who said that privacy is dead. My data is already out there, and why do I need it? I think there are lots of reasons why people need it. I think the most compelling reason is that you can easily say something or publish something that you regret, and it could be because norms change. It could be because laws change. And are you always going to be feeling 100% good about anything you've ever done in your life that you'd be okay with becoming public, 20 years later? I think a lot of people would reject that world. I think we have to understand that data, once it's released, is basically impossible to delete. And we have to make sure that if we're going to be publishing data in plain text for everyone to see, that we're very comfortable with the ramifications of that. And I would think that if you put that to people the right way, I think they'd really they would maybe reconsider their idea that they don't need privacy or privacy is dead. I think it's like a real dystopia where nothing can be kept secret.
And now a word from our sponsor, Edgewise Networks. The biggest problem in security that remains unsolved is unprotected attack paths that allow threats to compromise vulnerable targets in the cloud and data center. But traditional microsegmentation is too complex and time-consuming and offers limited value that's hard to measure. But there's a better approach, Edgewise Zero Trust Auto Segmentation. Edgewise is impossibly simple microsegmentation, delivering results immediately with a security outcome that's provable and management that's zero touch. At the core of Edgewise auto segmentation is zero trust identity, which automatically builds unique identities for all communicating software and devices by combining cryptographic properties of the workload with risk classifications. Edgewise protects any application in any environment without any architectural changes. Edgewise provides measurable improvement by quantifying attack path risk reduction and demonstrates isolation between critical services so that your applications can't be breached. Visit edgewise.net to find out more about how Edgewise can help stop data breaches. So there was a controversial talk at the Black Hat USA Security Conference in Las Vegas several weeks ago. It was given by a company called Crown Sterling, and they have a discovery of something called quasi-prime numbers. And it's in the cybersecurity community, it's caused quite the controversy, not only because the talk was a sponsored talk, meaning that they had to pay money to the Black Hat Conference to give the talk and get kind of some special treatment, but there's a lot of controversy, especially on the crypto side of the house, around this research itself. And is it snake oil, or is this actually something real, which potentially has the potential to change the way that we think of encryption and making modern encryption basically completely vulnerable to attack. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, it's an interesting story. I wasn't at Black Hat, so I wasn't there in the first person, but I did kind of read people's accounts of what happened. I think there's a lot of different ways you could think about this. Obviously, crypto used to be a pretty sleepy part of computer science for many decades, I think, and the value of Bitcoin and other follow-on cryptocurrencies has really changed that dynamic. I think people have this sense that there's like money to be made in crypto if you just convince the right people you're onto something. So I think that contributes to some of this. I'm going to say hucksterism because I don't think this is an honest attempt to advance the field. As far as I understand about what this company was describing, they claim to have made a fundamental advancement in integer factorization, and that problem is as old as the Greeks. And I think for 2 millennia, a lot of people have been very interested in this problem. You have the best mathematicians we know of, like Fermat and Euler, who spend a fair amount of time thinking about factorization. And so I think any advancements in the state of the art here would be just incredibly interesting to mathematicians and cryptographers, to the extent that you would basically have a keynote lecture at any of the top conferences in number theory or cryptography. And to think that you would have to pay for a gold sponsorship to get an audience for people to hear this advancement, that doesn't really compute to me. I think that's not, that's really a red flag as far as I'm concerned. And, I kind of, part of this talk, if you listen to it, the presenter saying things along the lines, I love math, I've always loved math, and always really loved number theory. I mean, this is a direct quote from what he said. I think in the first week of graduate school, I got a PhD in computer science at MIT between the years of 2003 and 2008. And I think it was the first week of graduate school, it was drilled into me that no one cares about, your personal experience or anything subjective you might bring to the table. It's really the work that you're talking about and the way you can most objectively present it. And to hear somebody who seems so unfamiliar with all, the conventions of the academy and the conventions of how you would advance the field, give a talk like this, it really sets off a red flag. And it just goes to show as someone who hasn't spent much time either reviewing research or presenting new research. So I would just think that the most parsimonious explanation here is that somebody wanted to advance their business interests. They bought a slot at Black Hat just to promote it, and there's really not much there in terms of danger to crypto. One more thing you could say too is that even if factorization was broken, which this talk doesn't seem to do, there'd be a lot of crypto that would still work pretty well. And I think, for instance, all the algorithms that Keybase uses isn't at all based upon factoring. It's based on the discrete log problem, which a lot of people think is actually harder than factoring, because if you solve a discrete log problem, you could probably make a lot of progress on factoring. So, in that sense, it doesn't even, if even everything he said was true, it probably wouldn't mean that much for crypto, in the grand scheme.
Yeah, well, that's good to know. And I guess it's just a wait and see.
Yeah.
See what else comes out after this, huh?
Yeah. I mean, you could, if you're a Black Hat attendee, you might have some complaints about the conference. I guess from their perspective, though, if they get a sponsor, though, to pay $100,000 to give a talk, that means everybody's ticket prices become cheaper. And so there's some sense in which the Black Hat organization would actually really like to do this. But, maybe there has to be a little bit of a quality control going forward to prevent this type of problem, because I think a lot of audience members were a little bit annoyed that this was not rigorous material being presented as if it were.
Yeah, and looked like Crown Sterling actually filed a lawsuit against Black Hat because of some of the comments and hecklers that were
Yeah.
in the talk. So
Yeah, I saw some footage of that. I think heckling is probably across the line. I don't think it's the right thing to heckle somebody. I mean, the easier thing to do would just be to walk out and just say, go gamble or whatever. I mean, there's a lot of other things you could do in Las Vegas other than watch a talk you don't like.
well, where can we find out more about you and Keybase.io?
Sure. Well, Keybase.io is an application for your smartphone or for your desktop, and we like to think of it as a more or less drop-in replacement for Slack, except you have the great guarantee that your conversations are encrypted and that only the people on your team get to see it, not other people who've been paid to spy on you or anything like that might happen with our competitors. So yeah, just go to keybase.io and install the app and give it a shot. I think you'll love it.
Great. Are you on Twitter, or what's the best way to reach you?
Yeah, I'm Max Taco on Twitter. So I have a pretty inactive Twitter feed. I think the most I'll tweet about is interesting new features that Keybase is launching. Yeah, and that's actually something that happens all the time. So that gives me a lot to talk about.
Well, that's great, Max. Well, thanks for coming on the show. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Tom. It's been a pleasure.